Okay, we'll start with this. Well, some very intriguing revelations regarding the potential fight between Kell Brook and Jesse Vargas have been revealed. Mike Kopinger, via Jesse Vargas, says, Jesse Vargas tells me he's in negotiations for an April 6th fight against Kell Brook that would take place at 147 pounds. Las Vegas, where Jesse hails from, and LA is also being considered. A welterweight fight that would headline a DAZN show. And this is a very curious development for a few reasons. Now, first, let's just cover the fan perspective. A Jesse Vargas fight,
decent fight,
or a Jeff Horn fight, which is another fight that's on the table. That's another potential opponent option for Kell Brook. Either one of those fights are decent fights for Kell Brook. Both of those fights, as far as I'm concerned, they're of equal value. But that's from a fan perspective. From where Kell Brook is sitting, one of these fights is actually more beneficial to him than the other.
Which one?
You gotta realize something. What exactly is the incentive for Kell Brook to go back down to welterweight after he's already moved up to face Jesse Vargas? The Jeff Horn fight is just as good a fight, but the difference between the Vargas fight and the Horn fight is the Vargas fight would take place in Vargas's backyard. He's got home field advantage, whereas the Horn fight, that would be in the UK, that would be in Brook's backyard. On top of that, you know, the Vargas fight would be a welterweight contest, whereas Kell Brook, for his last two fights, he's been campaigning as a junior middleweight. Coincidentally, that's where the proposed fight with Jeff Horn would take place at 154 pounds. That also is more beneficial to Kell Brook than the alternative, dropping down to 147 pounds after looking flat against Zarafa. I mean, if you looked flat at junior middleweight, what are you going to look like trying to make 147 again? I mean, you really got to think about this thing, that not only would you be giving up home field advantage, but you'd also be giving up weight at a time when there's a fight of equal value on the table that wouldn't require you to do any of those things. You would actually have those things working for you. Jeff Horn is just as interesting an opponent as Jesse Vargas.
He is.
Both guys are former world champions. Both guys fought Manny Pacquiao. You know, both guys, it's pretty much the same deal, except one fight expects you, one fight would require you to give up home field advantage and weight. So what's the incentive? I mean, I could understand if it were, dropping down to 147 for the Amir Khan fight, for example, because that's a fight of great domestic value in the UK. So the incentive there would be money. Something similar applies to a Crawford fight, for example. That, in Crawford, maybe they could stage it as a pay-per-view the way they're doing with the Khan fight, and you'd be fighting for a world title. So there you have two incentives, financial gain, and you get to fight for a title. Something very similar is also true in the case of a Manny Pacquiao fight, for example. That if you were going down there to 147, if you were to go back down there, the incentive would be to participate in a big pay-per-view fight with a Manny Pacquiao, someone like that. In those kinds of hypothetical situations, I can see the incentive. But Jesse Vargas, what incentive does he provide when you've got a fight of equal value already on the table? Jeff Horn is just as interesting an opponent as Jesse Vargas.
He really is.
So, it's an intriguing development because in one of my previous videos, I discussed that the fight was on the table, but I speculated, at what weight would a Jesse Vargas fight take place? Because if he's got to go down to 147 to have that fight, then the logical choice would be to stay at 154 and fight with Jeff Horn. There's certain perils associated with those kinds of fluctuations in weight. You gotta consider that Kell Brook actually looked flat in his last fight, and that was at a weight where he's supposedly more comfortable. He's supposedly more comfortable at junior middleweight than he was trying to make welterweight. So if you just looked flat at a weight where you're comfortable, how you gonna look at a weight that you haven't had to make in a while? I tell you, Jesse Vargas, he's a good boxer, but he's not a concussive puncher. But when you factor in that Kell Brook might actually struggle to make that weight, it creates a situation to where, yeah, there's certain perils involved. There's certain things you got to think about. So, I don't know what Kell Brook is going to decide to do. But I will tell you that the Jeff Horn fight is the logical choice because, well, you wouldn't have to cut weight for that fight, and you wouldn't have to get on a plane for that fight. It's just as interesting an opponent. It would probably grab just as much, if not more, attention in your backyard as opposed to going to Vegas for Vargas. It's not like you in either scenario, it's not like you're fighting for a world title, right? So then what are you giving up all these advantages for? That's the question I've got. Regardless of which situation Kell Brook decides to go with, whether it's Vargas or it's Jeff Horn, either one of those fights is an interesting little fight. But I will say that it's pretty obvious that one of those fights is far more beneficial to Kell Brook than the other. So I'd be very curious as to what would motivate him to go with a Vargas fight instead of a Horn fight. It's funny. When the most recent set of talks for an Amir Khan versus Kell Brook fight kicked off again, there were a lot of conversations regarding Amir Khan's demand that it be a welterweight contest. A lot of people, including myself, felt that Amir Khan is attempting to drain Kell Brook, bring him back down to welterweight so that he could weaken him. There's a whole hubbub over that shit. Now you think about that. There was a lot of resistance as far as, the weight, rehydration clauses, things like that. And there were some issues posed by all these different things, these different elements in those negotiations. You think about that so that, you can turn around and give up those advantages for Jesse Vargas. Why? What's the incentive in that fight? So, I don't know what Kell Brook is going to decide to do, but like I said, I'd be very curious as to just what exactly is the incentive to give up those two advantages for Jesse Vargas when you can stay in a more comfortable situation with Jeff Horn for a fight that is of equal value. Moving on. Earlier today, I'm sure most of you have heard already, a very big announcement was made regarding who Canelo Alvarez is going to be facing next. They have announced that Canelo Alvarez is going to be facing Daniel Jacobs in a unification fight for what are 3 world titles in the middleweight division. This is just my reaction to this news. I feel that this fight is a byproduct of what is a very competitive market that is only becoming more and more competitive. You got the people on the PBC side of the street doing their thing on Fox. You got Top Rank doing their thing over there on ESPN.
With all that fighters.
Bear in mind, Artur Beterbiev, who was on the DAZN side of the street, just crossed over to the ESPN side of the street. The market is competitive for everybody. It's not one way. The market is competitive for PBC, the way it's competitive for Top Rank, the way it's competitive for DAZN, and all those Matchroom fighters, all those Golden Boy fighters. Everybody is under the same pressure to keep up with the Joneses. And I feel that Canelo Alvarez participating in this fight is a byproduct of that. That you know what, you guys want to get monthly subscribers, you're not going to be able to do that with filler fights and keep busy fights. You're going to have to bring out the big guns. You're going to have to bring out your prize stallion, keep him active, keep him busy, so that you can keep those subscriptions coming in. And you can't just put them in there with any old body. They had a nice little turnout for the Rocky Fielding fight, but at some point things have to get interesting. Interesting enough that people want to subscribe. And one way you can do that is to put on one of the best contests you can with 2 of the fighters you got over there, Daniel Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez. I feel that this is a byproduct of what is a competitive market. And all things considered, I can't complain. You guys know that I don't pull any punches on Canelo Alvarez. I'm not sweet on that guy the way that some of y'all are sweet on that guy. But I do have to say that you can't look at this fight and complain. This is about as good an opponent as any. There were so many rumblings about Canelo Alvarez's potential opponent options. Perhaps a rematch with Gennady Golovkin, or maybe a fight with Caleb Smith at 168 pounds, or maybe a David Lemieux fight somewhere in Canada. Because they said they wanted to do business out there, and there were all kinds of talks. Bernard Hopkins, he had things to say about the fight, yada, yada, yada. There were all kinds of potential opponent options out there. And out of all of those options, this is about as good as any. It's a big fight against a good fighter.
He's well known.
World champion, you understand? It's a unification fight.
3 world titles.
That's saying that even if you're not a Canelo Alvarez fan, even if you're just a boxing fan and you're not partial to that guy in any way, you really can't complain about this fight. It's about as good a fight as you could have got. In regards to the fight, Daniel Jacobs released this statement. I'm happy to announce that I have officially signed with DAZN USA and I'm fighting Canelo Alvarez live in Las Vegas, May 4th, Cinco de Mayo weekend. I would like to thank all the parties involved in making this opportunity possible. I look forward to taking full advantage of this moment. A lot of people had choice words to say about Daniel Jacobs when they saw that he had established a professional relationship with Mr. Eddie Hearn. Mr. Eddie Hearn, who's constantly the subject of criticism to guys who are fans of particular fighters, guys who are fans of a particular outfit. But to those guys, I'll ask this question. Do you think that this fight would have landed on Daniel Jacobs' lap had he not made that move, had he not crossed over to that side of the street, had Daniel Jacobs not formed the relationship that he's had so far with Eddie Hearn, with Matchroom USA, had he not done that, do you think he would have got the fight?
Nope.
The answer is no. He'd be sitting where Jermall Charlo is sitting right now, out in the cold. So a lot of people trying to make it seem like Daniel Jacobs fucked up, like, he was doing better than him. Just a lot of bullshit. And this is what I'm talking about, that you got these guys that try to perpetrate these agendas, peddle this propaganda, and it doesn't align with reality, because the reality of it all is, had Daniel Jacobs not decided to to cross over to this side of the street with Eddie Hearn and form that whole relationship with him, had he decided not to do that, this wouldn't have happened. Trust me, this wouldn't have happened. He would have been just another guy saying Canelo's name and trying to get a fight. But he wouldn't be no different from Jamal Charlo. He wouldn't be no different. He wouldn't be sitting nowhere different from where he's sitting right now. So Daniel Jacobs definitely played his cards right, regardless of the fan-driven propaganda you tend to find on YouTube. Tell you something, for all those guys out there who want to swear up and down that Al Heyman is the Kaiser Soze of boxing, that this is the all-powerful, the almighty, the most powerful guy in the entire sport of boxing promotions or whatever, for all those guys, ask yourself this question. How is it that Jacobs made that move and got this fight, yet Jamal Charlo's been the mandatory for the WBC title for how long now? And how much closer is he to getting that fight? I'm not trying to talk Jamal Charlo down at the end of the day. I'm just citing certain realities that need to be addressed. That there were a lot of people out there that tried to make it seem like Daniel Jacobs leaguing up with Eddie Hearn was somehow a bad move. But if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened. So Daniel Jacobs definitely did the right thing. He's in a position to do big things. Now, I'm not going to get into a breakdown. It's too soon for that. I'm not going to get into a breakdown. There's plenty of time. We will have plenty of time leading up to the fight to discuss all the different elements, all the different angles of that fight.
From now till May.
I will say that the winner of this fight, whoever it may be, if it's Canelo Alvarez, this will move him up one spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. This will move him up one spot from where he sits today at number 4. The thing is, this fight's all the way out there in May, so there could be a lot of movement before we even see Daniel Jacobs or Canelo Alvarez throw the first punch. But I will say, at minimum, collecting this world title, or these world titles, depending on who wins the fight, that will either move Canelo up one spot or get him bumped off and have Daniel Jacobs occupy his place. It all depends on how it happens, ladies and gentlemen. Very exciting times in the sport of boxing. Now, another bit of news that caught my attention earlier today, in what is one of the more sensible decisions that the WBC has made in recent memory, it being that a lot of these mandates, a lot of this shit that they've been doing, really doesn't make a lot of sense. But this bit, this portion, this mandate, it actually makes sense. And that is that the winner of the Badu Jack versus Marcus Brown fight that's going down this weekend on the undercard for the Pacquiao-Broner fight, the winner of that fight is going to be the mandatory challenger to WBC and lineal champion Alexander Gvozdyk. Says one time in recent memory, the WBC actually decided to do their job, and it's something that we don't even have to complain about. It's actually something that we can be happy about, because this is going to force a situation to where we may get to see two guys that are on opposite sides of the street have to come to some sort of a solution so that the fight can come off. Look. Most of the action in the light heavyweight division, the fact of the matter is that most of the action in that weight class is on the top-ranked side of the street. And Badu Jack's been running around saying things that, if he wins this fight, he wants all the champions. Problem is, these are the champions that are out there. They're not on your side of the street. 3 of them are on the top-ranked side of the street, and 1 of them is over there at the zone. So that's a situation to where, if you really want those fights, your guys at the PBC are going to have to play ball. And we know they don't like playing ball. We know they don't want to have to deal with other people. But in this situation, those are the only fights out there that's the only way that they can keep you busy. Because if they decide to forego those kinds of situations, I don't know who the fuck they're going to have you fighting. Badu Jack and Marcus Brown just so happen to be the number 1 and number 2 guys in the WBC's rankings. So it makes perfect sense that the winner of that fight become the mandatory challenger for Alexander Gvozdyk. And since Badu Jack has been declaring that he wants all the champions,
that's what he said,
the situation in and of itself is ideal. Now, it's hard to know.
This early.
How exactly that situation is going to go. Should we expect to see Badu Jack, for example, if he were to win? Should we expect to see either Badu Jack or Marcus Brown make an appearance on ESPN? Or should we expect to you see, I don't know, Alexander Gvozdyk on either Showtime or Fox. It's in the air. It's too soon to know. The first thing we got to get through is the fight itself. We got to see who's going to beat who. Is it going to be Badou Jack beating Marcus Browne, or is it going to be Marcus Browne beating Badou Jack? I have picked Marcus Browne to win that fight on points. But regardless who wins the fight, it's an interesting situation. Now, this situation, much like the aforementioned Canelo Alvarez versus Daniel Jacobs fight, this situation is also a byproduct of what is a competitive and what is becoming a more and more competitive market. That PBC might have 1 or 2 light heavyweights on their side of the street, but they ain't got no belts on that side of the street. So at minimum, if you want to get one, there's gonna have to be some kind of bipartisanship, and the competitiveness of the market today forces the PBC into that situation to where you're gonna have to work with one of these guys, man. You're gonna have to, because ain't no belts on your side of the street. And I don't think your boys, I don't think the light heavyweights that you do got, I don't think these guys want to just fight in showcase fights and keep busy fights. I think that the fighters themselves want to be involved in relevant, big, and legacy-oriented fights, and there's no way for them to do that unless there are belts involved. You know, a lot of people these days, they like to undermine the value of being able to call yourself a world champion. But if you notice, all the relevant fights and all the relevant conversations about fights involve world champions, involve world titles. Fights like WBO champion Terrence Crawford versus IBF champion Errol Spence. Fights like Unified champion Anthony Joshua versus WBC champion Deontay Wilder. Fights like Unified champion Vasyl Lomachenko versus WBC champion Mikey Garcia. Every single relevant conversation that's floating around out there in the sport of boxing involves world titles. And the reason that's relevant to the light heavyweights over there at the PBC is the PBC ain't got no belts for you to fight for. So if you want to be a part of something major, at some point your team is going to have to work with somebody. Ain't no two ways about that shit.